that is it for that part of the show. So that leaves a pretty important discussion. It's time to discuss Penn State's game with Ohio State. I I've been thinking about this a little bit, just both thinking about it in the context of the podcast, thinking about the context of the blog. I haven't quite decided what I'm going to write yet for this week, but I have been thinking, and I think it was Poorman's All 22 article, which if you haven't read those yet, I think you need to check them out. He basically put the question out there of, is this James Franklin's most important game? So I want to begin there, and it's not a critique on Mike's article by any means. It's just I think that's a very fair conversation to have with this Ohio State game. I don't know that right now in this moment this is James Franklin's most important game at Penn State so far, because he's got another chance to, if this goes wrong, to fix it with being Michigan, right? They're still going to come out of the season being 11-1. But what does keep me up at night, does keep me bothered, and Mike did a nice job of calling this out in his column too, is this. There's a lot of checks that James Franklin has written. I'm taking words from the column right now, but there's a lot of checks that James Franklin has written lately, and Mike is 100% right on that, because I think ultimately, in the eyes of public perception, if Penn State loses this weekend, the sky is falling, everything is ending. We might as well just pack up the season, shut it down now. And I don't think that's how I feel about it, but that's going to be the sentimentality around the game if Penn State loses. And I think that kind of brings me back to our other point of this podcast, is patience. That being said, I still think Penn State is going to win this weekend. I think I think this defense is too good. I don't think this Ohio State team has been tested by a defense like this Penn State defense. Yes, Penn State hasn't played anybody. Ohio State's played Notre Dame. But at the same time, and I know they were playing UMass this weekend, and I know that they've played really nobody, but watch this Penn State defense, and it is the most athletic of my lifetime, at least. It is the most smart and cerebral defense I've ever seen. And that has been where Penn State has fallen short. It's been able to go to Ohio State and put up points. It's been able to hang in there. Penn State really gets an injury to Ulu last year, and that's when the game falls apart with JTT getting 2 sacks and a fumble or whatever it was off the top of my head. All of that is to say, patience is necessary. So if the game doesn't start out right, if the game isn't even at halftime, isn't going the way it should, we've seen time and time again that, especially with this team, it's shades of 2016. This is a second half team. This is a team that can turn it on late. It's just all about making sure that you make the most of that moment. And I know that was a lot of convoluted strings of theories, but that's about where I'm at with it at 8:01 on Monday evening.
So you're talking patience within the 60 minutes of action on Saturday, kind of like the Dr. Pepper commercial where they're not, burning stuff after the first play of the season. You want that kind of patience, which I'll go with you there. I think there's probably a few people who listen regularly, at least one who probably fell off their chair or went off the side of the road when they heard patience in James Franklin and Penn State in this context. Because I think people would be very impatient if they lose on Saturday, because they will point to, well, he's been here a decade, won the one title. And I had a guy at church, we were doling out coffee on Sunday. It's like, oh, big game next week. I'm like, yep. I care, but I don't. I do. But he's like, he said, if we went 2-11 every season, and those 2 games are Michigan and Ohio State, I'd be happy. He said, but that hasn't been what's happening. I'm like, that's true. So I don't think the fan base will be I do think the sky will be falling if they lose. I just don't think they're going to, of what I've seen of Ohio State. And I think Penn State has played them well out there and played them well in general. Now, again, they've lost, but they've played well. And I guess the people that are probably my brother, if he's to this point of listening, like, yeah, that's nice, they played well, but the coach is making bad decisions and making calls on whatever downs, and that's why they don't win the games. So that's what'll be fun to watch and see how that goes. I think the big indicator, if the media indicator of whether Penn State's doing any good, is whether you get a Gus Johnson A-level game or a Gus Johnson Illinois level game. If you get Illinois level, it's probably not good news. If you get excited Gus Johnson, the game's competitive and your team's probably got a chance. So that may be the one barometer that I was thinking about from a media perspective. If you get good Gus, the game's competitive and it's exciting.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that. Well, let's put a pin in Gus Johnson because I want to come back to that for a hot second. Yeah, that's the other part of this equation, right? Is like eventually a broken clock is right twice a day. And that's not to say Penn State is a broken clock, because I don't think they are. But eventually, like, James Franklin he has the pieces to figure it out. Can he make the moves to figure it out? And I think he can. Like, I think he's learned. We've seen him grow so much over the last 3-4 seasons. Ever since the COVID year, he's been a different coach because every year he's compounded a lesson. They haven't had to learn a lesson yet this year, and I think that is a good thing. I think that they're combining all of these other lessons into coaching, into playing, into roster development. We're going to see the best Penn State team that has ever played Ohio State in the James Franklin era on Saturday. And if James Franklin can't beat this Ohio State team, which doesn't have that quarterback as much as it's had the quarterback other years, does have probably the greatest college wide receiver in the last 5 years, 10 years even. But the defense doesn't keep me up the way it did before at night. It's just, there's something really wrong here if we can't figure this out based on everything that's in front of James Franklin, I guess.
Yeah, if not this year, then when, right? I mean, realistically. But I mean, I think that'll go towards sky is falling stuff, right? Like I do, from what I've seen of Ohio State and Penn State, think that Penn State will win. I think the running backs may finally have a bigger game and play a bigger role and do what what we talked about them doing. They'll break one here or there. They'll do some things. I think the receivers for Ohio State matching up against the Penn State defensive backs is not as bad as it sounds. I think Penn State defensive backs are really good. No, it's all about that what if, right? Like in some decision making, some calls, right? That's what it's going to come down to, is some coaching calls, because everybody's going to give you the Jimmies and Joes, and then it comes down to what does James do? And I think on the other side, what does Ryan Day do? I mean, he seems from afar, armchair quarterback, armchair psychologist, a little more stressed this season than some others, right? Like that there's some pressure that you got to win some games. You lost to Michigan, you got to do some stuff. So I think that adds a nuance to it in game day that may or may not have happened before. So that's what makes it fun. I mean, I'm excited to see it. It'll be a fun game to watch, and hopefully it comes out in a way that makes people happy and keeps lots of media stuff happening for us to talk about.
Yeah, the Ryan Day thing is interesting, and I wonder if some of that's like coaches speak, because he like flat out said after the Purdue game, we're not ready for what's next type thing, essentially. Or is that just brutal honesty? And I do think that is interesting. Let's go back to the Gus Johnson point real quick, because I do think that is interesting. And I was thinking about that a little bit this weekend. Did you see the Joel Klatt thing? Did you see that?
The exchange, you mean, from last week?
From on Saturday. If you didn't catch it, Joel Klatt essentially called out James Franklin for calling out Michigan's scheduling, but James Franklin wasn't really calling out that scheduling. It was just stating a fact. They haven't really played anybody. And Joel Klatt was like, they're playing UMass this weekend. I do wonder if this will be the record for most people muting their television if this game is 14-10 in the third quarter or something like that. amongst Penn State people, because I think people are just gonna, again, going back to the patience thing, just be patient about everything. It'll be fine. Go listen to Steve and Jack. That's what they're there for. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually, when I wrote and filed yesterday for the Altoona paper, I think I think it'll be interesting that production meeting that they have Thursday or Friday with the Fox people.
Oh yeah, fly
I
on
mean,
the wall
because
that guy.
James has a, he takes receipts. He might not say it like Deion Sanders does, but he keeps receipts too, right? So, I don't know that James, he can say it was matter of fact, but he was taking a shot too at whatever else was going on. So everybody's taking shots, and somebody that took shots at each other are going to be in the same room. So even if it's an offhand, we'll see how that goes. I mean, just some little dig. I'd respect him for that, but I mean, we probably won't ever know.
Yeah. All right. Here's the last question I want to pose to you about Ohio State, Penn State playing football this weekend. We have been very confident. I'm still very confident that this is probably the year that it's going to happen. And like you said, if not when. Do you, given everything you've seen this season, if you scale a 1 to 10, if you were at a 9 going into the season, are you above or below that as we sit here on Monday?
I think above. Like I don't know. I just what I've seen of Ohio State, like I felt the loss at Notre Dame was as much Notre Dame losing as it was Ohio State winning, obviously. And I know Ohio State put up good numbers last week. I don't know. I think Penn State has played well out there through the years, every year, no matter who's been there. They've been able to out the horseshoe. It's not like they're intimidated by the place. So, and I think they have as much talent across on both sides of the ball as, Ohio State does for a change. So I'm looking forward to it. And I think they are in good shape.
Yeah. That's optimistic Steve for you to fill your
There
ears.
you go. Wonderful, optimistic. This is the day to catch me, folks. Every week. This is the only place.
I'm telling you.
This is the only place this plays.